Welcome to Project Earned Value Procurement and Cost Management course. I'm Al Hirsch, your instructor for this course for this quarter, and my contact information is here. Please feel free to give me a call at either of these numbers anytime you have a question or send me an email, and I will certainly acknowledge your email, most likely within 6 hours, 12 at the most, and I will, in that response, in that acknowledgement, I will let you know how soon I'll get back to you with a response to your communications if I'm not able to answer it exactly at that time. The manner in which this course is delivered is that no matter what your experience and exposure is to the project world, whether you have no project experience, you're part of a team, they're part of the project office, some project management experience, a lot of it involved in large projects or even in the project office environment, the PMO. This course will address items and substances and subjects that will help you from wherever you are in your experience level, your knowledge and skill set level to grow and actually improve and develop further capabilities for a successful career in the project management world. As a part of that perspective, as a part of the environment that I would like you to keep in mind as we go through this course, is that project managers always have to have a perspective about their image, their position, their word. I would like you to think of yourself as in every activity you do in this course, in every discussion, in every submission of a deliverable, in every exchange, in every interaction with anyone else in the class or myself, I would like you to do it from the perspective of a project manager, realizing the responsibility of representing the team and representing the project. In other words, whatever your position is, whatever the statement is, whatever the discussion is, the point you want to make sure that you have a rationale. Always. Shooting from the hip doesn't cut it. So I'd really like you to be able to support whatever your position is, whatever the decision is that you make. Make sure that you have a rationale that supports that. Additionally, for the presentations, for your discussions, for your deliverables, maintain credible support. Be able to back up what you say. Be able to support and show that the statements that you make, the positions you take, the recommendations that you make has credible support, and therefore you will develop credibility, and you will also develop an appearance and an image of authority, and you will be respected and you will be listened to, which is incredibly important as a project manager. From my experience as a project manager, and I have been a project manager for many tens of years, I have taken the GPS user segment project in concept validation when we were first developing the GPS constellation for GPS performance, which you're so familiar with today. When we were going through concept validation, in other words, we were trying to run a project, develop and test user equipments and satellites and upload stations to demonstrate that the GPS concept was indeed a valid and viable concept. The contract, the company I worked with, was in trouble. We had been provided with show cause and stop work from the U.S. government, and the project was about to be canceled, and GPS would not have been, at least not for a long, long time. I was asked to step in and take over the project, bring the project back to a new baseline, manage it through to a successful conclusion. I did that. I did that with the help and the efforts of the entire team, 280 some people. I also worked with vendors, subcontractors, and we developed 8 different types of GPS users equipment, from missiles to fast movers like fighters, to slow movers like ships, to man packs like wearing it on your back, all different types of development systems, reference stations, and it was a success. I had also managed a NATO satellite communications project where the NATO community was going to take liquidated damages on our bonds and our performance bonds, and we were basically going to be in default of the contract, and I was able to step in and turn that around and make that a successful project. So my experience and my specialty as a project manager is not just running projects, but actually working on projects that are in trouble, are in very bad stages of health, and work with the teams and reconstruct those projects, develop new baselines that are successful, where the projects would become successful and the team would become winners. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to accomplish that in every assignment that I've done. So it's from that point of view that I speak, and that I want to pass on to you the benefits of my experiences and what I've learned as a project manager. And in a nutshell, one of the best ways of encapsulating the whole thing is to say avoid surprises. Project manager's primary task is to avoid surprises. They're not in the plan, and they can ruin projects, customer relations management. I've seen it. But surprises are avoidable, and actually, from my point of view, I think surprises measure the project manager. The cause of surprises is the lack of adequate and effective communications and notice to the various stakeholders in a project, whether it be the team, whether it be management, whether it be a sponsor, key stakeholder, customer, advisor, auditor, whatever it is. If anyone gets surprised, it's because the project manager did not do their job, which means that their communications plan for that audience was not effective, was not adequate, was not sufficient, and they did not keep people informed. And so, to me, the measure of an effective project manager or a key project person is to avoid surprises, and they can be avoided. So that's the message in a nutshell that I want to pass on to you. The second is that as a project manager, you need to manage your professional performance as addressing towards the team, towards the project, towards the corporate world. In other words, your professional performance as far as the decisions that you make. I want to refer to this little chart here on the right side and define what I call decisions made good. And what made good means is the decisions are helping you along the axis of the project plan. In other words, every decision that you make, like on the right side, is lined up with achieving the goal. They're not decisions like on the left side, which might drive the project in different directions, slow it down, take it off course, or anything like that. And the way you do that is you keep in mind the project goal and what you're trying to achieve at all times. And so every decision that is made has been considered against the goal, and the decision that is made tries to get you as close as possible in a continuing straight line towards that goal. Sometimes you have to deviate a little bit, but in the majority, your decisions should lie along the project plan to take you to your goal. Progress. You talk about progress along the team makes. Sometimes project managers and project plans take the team off into a different direction from directly towards the goal. And when you do that, you travel a large distance, but only a small portion of it is actually effective, what I call distance made good, that gets you towards the goal. So the closer you can bring the travel distance down right on the axis towards the goal, the more effective and the better is the performance and productivity of the entire project team, and the higher the chances that you will achieve your goal on time, on cost, on schedule. Okay? And this will be demonstrated. Both of these facts are not things that can be hidden. They will be demonstrated. The performance on making decisions good and making good progress will be demonstrated in the project plan and the performance of the project team. Another aspect of your professional performance is leadership. Practice good leadership, integrity, respect, good communications, responsibility. The project manager is responsible for the project team and responsible for the project. So if anything goes wrong, if there's any complaint, any chastisement, any discipline that comes down from the outside of the project to the project, or some manager wants to chastise or discipline a team member, the project manager stands up and says, I am responsible for the project. I am responsible for the project team. You do it to me. I will take care of what needs to be taken care of within the project team. So what you're really doing is you're protecting or shielding the team. You're not hiding things. You're not keeping someone on the team from being talked to or asked questions. Why did this happen? What went on here? But in the same sense, as a project manager, you are responsible for the project. And you need to take the heat for it when things go wrong. And you need to protect and shield the team so that they can feel comfortable knowing that maybe they'll make a mistake or two, but they can feel free in doing their very best about doing the work that needs to be done for the project. And they don't have to be looking over their shoulder all the time, wondering if somebody's trying to get them or lay for them or anything like that at all. If somebody has done something that's not correct, then the project manager will deal with that individual as regards that point. But any activity that comes from outside to the project team is dealt with by the project manager, sort of like a captain of the ship. You're responsible for it. You take the heat for it. Create an environment for success. Get that project team up and jumping. Have them take ownership in the project. That way you'll bring it across the finish line, and a lot of people will have a lot of satisfaction, including the customers and your management team, on how well the project was conducted. These are just some thoughts that I want to share with you that I've learned over the years and that I think you need to have. Every project manager needs to consider and have some amount of this kind of capability and property and consideration if they want to actually perform as an effective and successful project manager with project team members that want to work with them again. Okay, let's get into the course a little further. Our required text, we have Kirchner as the primary text. It's the 11th edition of Project Management by Harold Kirchner. It's a deep book. I understand that it's a complex book, but it is very, very good. And the areas of it that we're going to be working with will be very helpful in covering the subject matter of this course. Also, as a guide, the Project Manager, PMBOK, the 5th edition from the Project Management Institute, will also use that as a text that'll help give us guidance and also perspective on the material we're learning as it applies to the knowledge areas, the key knowledge areas from project management as seen by the Project Management Institute. Next, I want to talk about the course major topics. Okay, there's a number of them. The course is a very packed course. There's a lot of material in here, a tremendous amount of material in here. Because of that reason, these instructor presentations some of them will probably be pretty long, and I apologize for them being that long, but there's that much material. And I have reviewed these slides. I've gone through this material several times, and I don't think it is wise for me to take any more out of it. Otherwise, I would not be treating you properly with respect and presenting to you the materials of this course. The three major subjects of this course is the earned value management, procurement, and project cost management. And we will discuss those, and we will go through all of those as the course progresses. Taking a look at our schedule, we got 12 weeks. This is our first week, and our first topic will be pricing and estimating. You will notice that the topics, the date and the week numbers are on the left side, topics are down the middle, and then on the right side is reading assignments. For instance, Kirchner, chapter 14, starting at page 677. And then there's also an assignment, and that's a case. We will do 10 case studies. This case study, this first week, is the estimating problem. And when you have a case given to you in 1 week, it is due the date of the next week. So in other words, this first case, the estimating problem, is due on June the 30th. In week 2, the case, the bathtub period, is due on July the 7th. And likewise, down through the 10 cases. So there's 10 cases for the first 10 weeks. Then there's no case in week 11. However, on the week 12, the final examination will be a special case study, and we'll deal with those. The cases in Blackboard, you can download them and read through them. You'll see them in your text. You can read them and work them out, and then I expect you to either send me your response, the discussion assignments, by email, or upload them in Blackboard. Okay? If there's any questions, send me an email and we'll deal with it. So let's talk about week 1. Let's start and get into this. Let's talk about pricing and estimating. And we're talking about pricing and estimating as it relates to earned value. We may not cover everything in cost estimating, but we will cover most of it. And we will cover issues of pricing. And that'll be in this first week. When we take a look at estimating costs, one way to look at it is simply like model. We have inputs, outputs, and then we have some mechanization, some machine inside that does some work. Well, this one we talk about our inputs with the project goal. We use the project goals and inputs, scoping, the baseline scope, WBS, work breakdown structure, schedule, staffing plan. All these are input. These are sources of data for us, from which we can apply tools and techniques to develop a project cost estimate. And in the output, when we're finished, will be either like on an activity cost basis, we'll have basis of estimates, what our estimates are based on, we'll have the labor and material costs, we'll have project plan document updates. In other words, sometimes we learn things as we're going through planning and in the estimating cycle, and it reflects back and we decide we want to change some aspect of previous project documentation. And when we do that, we have to make sure that we keep all the previous project planning documentation and chartering documentation up to date, current with where we are now and with whatever new knowledge we have. And so it is necessary that all of the project documentation reflect the same position, the same goals, the same understandings, the same assumptions. So often we have to go back and we have to update previous documents. And then the project should cost. The should cost is the project's responsibility to present to management or to the customer what the project should cost if all things go nominally. No fat, no reserve, or anything else. What would it take for this project to be accomplished if everything is nominal? And then 6, we do our risk assessment. We will have a risk reserve of schedule and of cost that we recommend be funded in addition to the project should cost. And these two budgets, or these two amounts of money, will be what the project manager has as a budget, total budget, to perform the project. Okay. So let's talk for a minute about the project manager's resources. We talk about a project manager. What's your effectiveness? What's your authority? The ability to get something done? Well, the things I want to talk about are the fact that there are really only 2 items that are scarce and non-recoverable, and that is time and budget, or money. And the reason I call them scarce is you only have a certain amount. That's it. And there isn't anything in there that'll give you some slush fund or some extra time to get something done. And the reason I call these the 2 resources that are scarce and non-recoverable is because once we've spent the time, once the day has gone by, once the hour has gone by, we cannot get it back to do it again. It's non-recoverable. We can get another hour, we can get another day, another week, but we can't get that which we had. Same thing with the budget. Once we've spent the money, we can't get it back. We can't get it back to spend again. We might get more money, more budget, overrun, but we can't get what we had back. That's why they are scarce and non-recoverable. And quite frankly, a successful project manager has time, they're on schedule, and they have budget. In other words, they have the remaining budget for the finishing of the project and for the work that has to be done. A manager that does not have any time and has run out of budget or spent all the money really is in a world of hurts. What that means is that they're really probably ought to find themselves a job, because without having budget that can be authorized or time to do some work in, a project manager is not very effective, and not very many people are going to pay attention to the project manager. So my point is this: maintain your budget, maintain your time, your schedule, because with those you can have the authority and exercise. You're responsible to make decisions and make things happen. Without it, you better go find another job. The primary objectives that a project manager commits to when they accept a project is to complete the project within cost, within time, or like on schedule, with the required performance and acceptance by the satisfied customer and key stakeholders. And if you look at this drawing here, you will see that actually time, cost, and performance are on 3 separate axes. So it's not simple to bring a project in on target, meaning you hit the cost, you hit the schedule, and you hit the performance all at the same time, which is the end of the project, which is the closing of the project. If you overrun on cost, you haven't done it. If you overrun on time, you haven't done it. If you don't meet the performance requirements, you haven't done it. You've got to hit all three. That's the goal, that's the target, and that's the commitment that a project manager makes. I will bring this project in on budget, on time, with the required performance. No caveats, no exclusions, no qualifications. I will bring it in on time, within the budget, with the required performance and a satisfied customer. That is the target. That's what a project manager has in mind all the time. Okay, with the basis that we've established, let's talk about estimating the work. This chart just shows us a overall generalized way of walking through a planning cycle on a project, starting in the upper left with the definition, developing a W work breakdown structure, looking at the work, sequencing it, finding out what the resources are. On the top leg, developing a schedule, finalizing it, and then finalize the budget. On the bottom, we find the resources, estimate the work, get resources, develop the budget, finalize the budget, on until we have a completed project plan. So one of the things that we want to consider is the work. The work is where we spend the money. The work is where we need labor, where we need materials, and that's where we do our estimating. As a basis now, we need some background. We need some common understanding amongst all of us. And the first place we want to go is the types of costs. There are really two types of costs we deal with. One is called direct costs and the other is indirect costs. The direct costs are those costs that can be directly attributable to the project. In other words, if you didn't have the project, you wouldn't spend the money. So under direct costs, we talk about direct labor costs, employees, fringe benefit and taxes, if we're going to use contract labor or temporary labor, any materials or equipment that's needed for the project, and then any other expenses, if we have any license fees, travel fees, transportation fees, if we have to travel, visit the customer or a vendor, those fees, travel costs, are direct costs. Conference expenses, if we have to go to the customer to have a project review or a design review. Any type of cost that's incurred directly because of the project is called a direct cost. The other expense category is usually known as ODC, other direct costs. We usually talk about direct costs, ODC for other direct costs, which really means that's that other expenses category. And then we talk about indirect costs. Well, if direct costs are those costs which are directly attributable to the project, indirect costs are those which are not directly attributable to the project, or that we cannot directly relate them to the project. We may have a level of management above the project manager that may spend some time working with the project manager or talking to them or advising them, but that manager may have other responsibilities, other projects, other duties, administrative duties, other duties to that manager's higher level management. And so often that time, their time, cannot be directly realized or specified so that it can be charged directly to the project. So those type things are called indirect costs, and they develop into overhead pools or pools of cost which will be allocated back to the project on a percentage basis. Many of those kind of costs are marketing, management, IT cost, HR, use and occupancy, lease, lights, communications, security, any guards, security guards, parking lots, provisions, facilities, general administrative costs, those costs that are related to the executive officers of the company and the staff supporting those executives. With the direct and indirect cost definition, now this cost is a little different in that we're looking at a cost buildup. We're not looking just at definitions of direct and indirect costs, but we're looking at how do we get from the direct cost, the person that is working on the project, how do we build the costs up to get to the total project cost? And that's what this slide shows us. It gives us the cost buildup. We start out with our direct costs, all the labor direct costs, those people that are directly working on the project. the employees, contractors, temp laborers, any taxes or fringe benefits associated with that labor. Here is that ODC, other direct costs, any materials or equipment that has to be purchased for the project, directly for the projects, any subcontracts we may have. We may go out and we may subcontract a portion of the project out to some other supplier or vendor. That would be a subcontract. It would be a direct cost. It's directly chargeable to the project. If we didn't have the project, we wouldn't spend the money, and it's considered as an other direct cost. So once we have all the direct costs, then we look at the application of the overhead pool, what we were talking about, and this is an indirect cost. We have an overhead burden that we have to lay on top of the direct costs, and we have a G&A, general and administrative. And the general and administrative usually is where we have the executives and HR and marketing and administration type costs. Those are our indirect costs. Once we have our direct costs and all of our indirect costs added up, then we get to a point where that is the total should cost, or the total cost of the project and what the project requires. Then we have gone through a risk analysis, risk management reserve. We've determined what we need as a risk reserve pool, a pool of funding to manage and handle the impacts to the project of any risk events that occur. And with those two, the direct and indirect costs plus the risk reserve, then we will add, if this is a project that is revenue generating, in other words, we're doing this for an outside customer, then we add on profit. And I want to point out that profit is not reserve. Profit is and actually belongs to the company, and the project manager needs to keep their fingers off of the profit. It is not theirs. They put their fingers on that profit, or they spend beyond their should cost and their risk reserve. They have just created an overrun, and they have just gotten a reputation for overruns, and their project is considered to be in an overrun, and that's not where a project manager ever wants to be. Another way of looking at the buildup of costs, and this is the same material, the same information, but a little different, is looking at it from a price breakdown point of view. In other words, we're looking at the elements from a price perspective. We have the labor costs, which we've talked about. We have the overhead costs. We have material costs. The overhead cost is a burden. It's an indirect cost, if you remember that from the previous slide. But we take the labor costs, the overhead and material costs, and that is the basis. We add those up, and that's the basis for computing the G&A burden. In other words, that's a percentage too. So that gets added on there. And the sum of all those equals our total cost. That is the cost that, as a project manager, I am recommending that is authorized as the budget for the project. If this is an outside contract that we have to deliver this for a customer, this is the cost that I will use to fund the project performance. And then on top of that, there is the fee or profit, which belongs to the company, not the project. And then there's another element there, which is called the cost of money. And the cost of money is usually on government contracts. I'll talk about that a little further in the next slide. But the sum of the total cost, the fee, and any cost of money is price. And that is what a customer will pay for this project. And the three elements, the G&A, overhead, and cost of money, are called indirect costs. All the other costs are direct costs. So let's talk about this three types of the indirect costs. Let's talk about these over these pools of money, and there are three. The overhead costs, which is applied to the materials and labor and other direct costs, and then we have the G&A that gets applied to those direct costs plus the overhead costs, and then we have the facilities capital cost of money, which is applied to everything above. Okay. And the indirect cost process is the basis that we use when we have to make sure that we take all the costs in the company and distribute it across the projects and across the work that's done on the projects, so the company can recoup all those costs and be able to pay for them and have the company at least break even. And if there's a profit, then the company will actually show a profit for the year. Normally your CFO works and they plan the fixed costs of money. They know what they're going to invest, how much money they're going to need to borrow, what facilities, expenses they have, or facilities they got to acquire. Also, that's usually in a long-term basis in their planning, their budgeting cycles for the company. As a project manager, usually you can expect some reasonable stability in the rates for these three items. However, the project manager needs to be aware that should the company not achieve their sales target or get all the sales in that they think has been budgeted or planned in a quarter or a year, the fiscal year, the overhead cost can go up, or the percentage goes up, the burden cost goes up, because there isn't sufficient sales or there isn't sufficient orders to distribute what the planned overhead costs were. And so the projects that are funded and are operating sometimes get hit with an increase in the overhead rate, which is an increase in cost, which will make a project blow its budget. And project managers need to pay close attention to that phenomenon because it happens sometimes, but more often most project managers would like. The definition, I put this up here for you to see and take a look at. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I've already hit it a couple of times. I will take a look at talk about the facilities capital cost of money, because that is a form of an indirect cost incurred because of the cost of borrowed funds and invested capital in facilities, usually for government contracts. The facilities capital cost of money is basically like an offset. It's an allowance, negotiated allowance that the government will allow the contractor to charge to recoup or offset some of the interest on monies that are borrowed, and to also to offset some of the investment that a company may have to make on capital equipment or capital facilities, buildings or whatever, that is going to be used in government contracts. So you will not see facilities capital cost of money in most commercial contracts or commercial pricing, but when the government is the customer, you will normally see this capital cost of money. Some of the elements in indirect expenses, management, I've spoken about that, employee-related expenses, operating supplies, depreciation, travel for the management and executive team, new business funds if they're going out for new business ventures or trying to develop or increase the business, corporate office, lease expenses, all of the type of expenses that you'll have in a company that are not directly related and associated with the specific project. Some of these costs are fixed, some are variable, and so it is not always easy to predict them with any accuracy from year to year. Okay, this is a point that about indirect costs and direct costs that you need to be well aware of. The direct costs usually do not create any issues because it's very obvious what the direct cost is, who's incurring it, what the hours are, what they're doing, what the work is, how that relates to the project. However, the indirect costs or the burden over direct costs are usually sometimes 5 times what the direct cost is. In other words, if you're making $20 an hour, which relates to about $40,000 a year, if you're making $20 an hour, your actual burden cost could be as much as $100 an hour or more. With profit in it, it would be higher. And that is basically the amount of revenue that you as an individual must generate for the company to break even, in other words, cover all their costs, plus have a profit for the year. So that's often why we may see different contractors or consultants billing rates at $250 an hour or $400 an hour or $150, or we may even see our own billing rate go out to a customer or someone else far in excess of anything we're getting out of it. And the reason is because the indirect costs usually far exceed the direct costs by several factors meaning like multiples, 3 times, 5 times, 6 times, 4 times, depending on what the cost of your company, how your company is incurring costs, and what the expenses for the company's operations are. So the point that I want to make here takes us to the center of the page where we're talking about fixed price and cost reimbursable. A lot of times we have customers that give us a cost type contract, and other customers give us fixed price contracts. If we have a customer that's going to reimburse us for our costs, it would be nice if somehow we could put some of those indirect costs on that cost reimbursable contract. That would be less that has to go to the fixed price project, and that might make the company look like it's making a much better profit. And there's a tendency occasionally to do something like that. However, it is highly illegal, it is highly frowned upon, and it can create big problems, and it is a crime that can get somebody some really good jail time, and it can get companies really penalized by the courts. The disbursement of overhead to a fixed price contract and to a cost reimbursable type contracts has to be level, has to be equal in percentage and equal in the way it is calculated and applied. And this is a sensitive area. It has to be consistently applied across all contracts. Why do we need to estimate the project cost? Okay, a lot of reasons we can ask the questions. Can the customer afford the project? Is it worth doing? Is it attainable? Can we really achieve it? Is the approach we have on the right track? Do we really understand how and why to do it? We also need to be able to get some management approval or authorization to do the job. So we need to figure out what it's going to cost. It is not acceptable to a project manager to engage in a project where they have no idea what the project cost is going to be, nor without having the proper authority and approval so that they know they have a budget, an approved, authorized budget that they can count on. So it's necessary for us to provide information that shows feasibility and viability in exactly what we're going to do. But I don't want to fool anybody. We talk about estimates, and we'll do our very best to get a good estimate, one that is pretty accurate. The truth of it is that we really have got to admit that estimates are always guesses. They're never exact. We can ask questions like, and you can do it from your personal experience, how long does it take to drive to work in the morning? Every day is different. How long does it take to put 20 pages in a database or correct a computer program? I once went up to a software engineer and in a project, actually it was a GPS project, and I asked them about a certain bug they were working on, and I asked them, do you have any idea how long it's going to take before you can have this solved, fundamentally stopping the progress of the project? That individual looked at me and said very clearly, and looked me right in the eye and said, 5 minutes after I find out what's wrong. That was the size of that. Notice I didn't forget that, and I don't even want to tell you how many years ago I learned that. Write a movie script, catch a fish. The estimates are probabilistic. There's always error in the estimates. Okay, when we talk about a cost estimate for a project, it's the sum of costs for all the elements and parts of a project. Sometimes they're not just project-related costs, but sometimes the owner or the customer, whether it's an internal customer or an external customer, sometimes the customer has got to do certain things to prepare for the delivery of the project. So often there are costs in addition to the project costs. In other words, there are costs customer, the owner, the sponsor of the project has to incur to be ready for the project once it's delivered. In our project budget, the cost estimate is very essential, very important. And we use the work breakdown structure as a baseline. It really provides the best tool to identify all of the tasks that we've got to accomplish on the project. As I said, cost estimates are guesses, and now what we need to do is we need to go through the process of putting that estimate together so that it'll be the most intelligent and informed guess. Doing that, it will have the highest probability of being close to the real cost. All right? So when are projects estimates needed? And there's several times. Sometimes we're looking at selecting a project, and maybe there'll be a top-down. In other words, some just high-level manager will make an estimate of what the project cost should be. It's usually got a very low accuracy, low precision, and it's usually got a limited time. when they're looking at the project, you don't go through an extensive exercise. Often when we're doing the project initiation, a second type of when we need an estimate, that'll be a bottoms up. In other words, we'll work from the tasks and build up the cost step by step until we have every cost. Project planning is the same way. It'll be from the bottoms up. Many projects that I've had, I told you I've done turnarounds and things like that. The first thing I do when I walk in and take over a project is I go back and I review the entire existing, whatever there is of it, or however bad it is or good it is, the project plan. And then I launch my own activity with the team to do a complete estimate, schedule estimate, project plan, cost estimate, because I will be responsible for that. I don't take responsibility for what existed before. I take responsibility and I have to perform to what I assess as the project cost, the project schedule. With project planning, we want a high precision, high accuracy. And then also when we're doing project change or rebaseline. Project change, rebaseline is like when I walk in to take over a project. We had a baseline for the project, but actually for some reason or another, the project's in really sad shape. And so we have to do a rebaseline. In other words, we do replanning. We come up with a revised or modified project plan, budget, risk analysis, whatever. That's a bottoms up estimate. If we're doing a project change, in other words, we have a baseline, we got a good project, we're running along and all that, but somebody, the customer, the sponsor, our boss, somebody says that they want to do a change to the statement of work or the specification. In other words, there's a change to the project. We have to take and evaluate what the cost of that change is, and what the cost of the change is, and what the schedule impact of that change is, because it will have an effect on the project. You can't add work without adding cost and maybe adding duration to the project. You will add time to the project to some tasks. You will add tasks. And then the other aspect of it is, once we know what the project change itself is going to cost and the time required for it, then we have to figure out how do we insert that in the project, and what is the impact of that in cost and schedule. Sometimes we can select, well, we won't start this change till we get to this point in time where these tasks are done. Sometimes a change has to go in for now for other reasons, and sometimes we have to throw work away. That means money is lost, schedule is lost, work is lost. It's scrapped, and we have to basically throw it away, ignore it, and we have to make our adjustments and come up with a new rebaseline or the new resulting modified baseline based on the introduction of a project change. When we're talking about project reporting, we're working mostly from actual cost incurred, highest accuracy, highest precision, and what we want to do, and that's part of what we're going to do here in Earned Value, is we're going to compare that to our project baseline, our references, and that's how we need to measure performance and figure out exactly what we're doing, where we're at, and what's going on the project. The estimating we want to do has got to make sense. We got to do it with our feet on the ground. No shooting from the hips, no head in the clouds kind of thing. We need to come up with as accurate an estimate as we can. It is our responsibility to our management, to our sponsors, to our customers, to give them the most accurate cost we can so that they can determine whether they can afford it and what they got to do to make sure they can fund it. And it's also self-serving. It's self-serving in the sense that we want to know what the actual cost or the best cost is going to be, because we want to be able to have identified that and be able to perform to it. We want to be able to deliver to it. We've made a commitment to deliver the cost and schedule. Okay? So the type estimate that we're going to do, we need to be clear on. We have to make sure that we're using good common sense, documenting our assumptions. No matter where we are in what kind of estimate this is, we need some process for building that estimate. We have to do any assumptions, exclusions, inclusions. We got to document them, risk factors, and then also give whoever has requested the estimate, give them an idea exactly when we'll be done, and make sure that we meet that schedule too. And remember what I said about surprises. Make sure everyone understands all of the elements of the estimates. Other things that take into consideration when we're doing the estimate is who asked for it, the purpose, What kind of data is needed? In other words, what's the turnaround time? I've been called into someone's office and had a meeting, and they wanted a number within before I walked out of the office in 15 minutes. Sometimes I had a half an hour. Sometimes I got a phone call and was asked for something. Sometimes I had 24 hours. Sometimes when customers would send me a request for a proposal, I would have 45 days, sometimes 30 days. And that's to pull a whole proposal team together and put it together and do all the costs and do everything you need and make sure it's a winning proposal so that you get awarded the work. When is the data needed? What's the turnaround time? The complexity of the project. What are you trying to accomplish? What's the team size? Where can we do it? Do we need a special facility for it? Do we need to rent a place? Do we have room? Are we going to use virtual teams where we may be working with teams that are in different countries, different part of this country, different time zones, different cultures, different nationalities? What's the factors that are going to affect how well we work together and how we build a team? What are the interdependencies? Are there other projects involved in this? Is the customer have a project that's running that we're going to be in parallel with? Um, what's the best way of estimating our approach on using the WBA? On using the WBS? I'm sorry. What's the best way to estimate these costs? And sometimes we may have to we may have to estimate a complete project life cycle, and either by phase or the life cycle itself. In other words, from the time we do the project to the time we deliver it, we install it, we train the customers, people, users on it, and it may also include support and maintenance and upgrades to whatever it is that we're delivering. As I said, some estimates are seat of the pants guesses. Sometimes you're forced to do that, and most projects will overrun, and but that never justifies any less than the best estimate that you can give them. Okay. Interesting fact here: the first 15 time you got through the first 15% of a project, the S curve, which is the summation of all the costs on the curve, the S curve can be projected, and it usually can wind up predicting the cost, can predict the final cost within 5% of where it'll hit. And that surprises a lot of people. But yes, you can do that, and I've seen it done. I've done it myself. When we do estimates, especially when we're doing budgetary estimates or rough order of magnitude estimates or WAGs or whatever you want to call it, we need to give ranges. I have known that many, many times requests like that are made, and whoever provides the estimate does not qualify or provide a range for the estimate. And we need to make sure we do this. Plus, we want to provide some detail to develop a sense of confidence in the accuracy of the estimate and what's not in the estimate and how soft an estimate might be. Okay? When the estimates are rough, like a 15-minute or a 10-minute estimate or a half an hour or even a 24-hour estimate, we need to provide less detail in the sense providing less precision. Don't indicate that this one's going to take $1,100,050 when you can't provide that kind of precision. 1 million may be good enough, or 1.5 million, round it up rather than round it down. Here is a chart that gives a perception of the precision of some estimates when we're talking about estimates. Sometimes when we're doing an estimate really at a top level without going through the whole project or anything like that, somebody walks in and says, we want you to develop this kind of machine, or we want this software package developed. How much is it going to cost? And that's usually like conceptual or swag and top level. It's a very high level estimate, and it doesn't have a lot of substance to it. So there is a lot of error into it, and we need to take a look at the order of magnitude of the precision, and in this case it's saying plus 75%, minus 25%. These numbers are conventionally um, observed or seen across the country as the numbers when we're talking about a top level portfolio conceptual order of magnitude type estimate. I personally and professionally don't use them. I use much larger ones. I will say plus 200% and minus 25%. I'll stay with that one, but plus 200% because we often do not have sufficient information to give the high end of a estimate to a customer, and that's usually where the most trouble is. Based on this estimate, usually the reason somebody needs it is they want to know whether they want to go ahead or whether they want to ask for budget. From the customer wants to go to their management and get budget authorization to begin the process of planning this project or doing this project. And if some vice president goes to their senior vice president and asks for funding of $2 million for a project, and then later on, as you go through the cost estimate and you get all the detailed costs, you find out the project costs $2.7 million. You're going to have a very, very unhappy customer because that customer is going to have to go back and tell their senior vice president, oh, the error, the number they had was wrong. They need 2.7 or 3 million, and they look at it as a career limiting activity that they have got to do. And so your customer gets very, very upset when you go back and you have to increase the number from the budgetary number. But it's normal. It's what really happens. We don't really know. But yet, on the other end, somebody is looking at it as something that's going to embarrass them or create a hardship for them in their organization. And so that's why I go to the plus 200%. If you're doing a preliminary design, a preliminary cost estimate where maybe you've got some work done, you got some idea what it's going to cost, there's been some thinking, maybe there's been another project that's been similar to this that you can give like a preliminary estimate or some appropriation design estimate, budgetary kind of number, then the tolerance, the precision range is less. And here it's plus 25%, minus 10. You can see how it tightens up a little bit. I would still say at least plus 100%, maybe plus 150. I don't like to bring that high end down because, as I said, it's the one that creates the most trouble and havoc. The bottom one is the all levels of the WBS. We're talking about grassroots now, a final, definitized. These are the kind of estimates we put together that take the most time, have the most work to them, are most definitized, and have the best assessment of what it takes to do a job. And those estimates are called definitive estimates, and they have a tolerance here, plus 10%, minus 5%. And in this case, I use those same percentages, plus 10, minus 5. And because at this point, we've done a lot of work and we've got a lot of information, a lot of detail on exactly what it takes to do this project. This slide basically provides us some insight, some more detail about these various type estimates, and gives us more definition to them, more specific definition to them, and categorizes them so that you can look at them. The rough order of magnitude estimate, a parametric estimate means that it's actually related to some other type activity. If it's, for instance, if it's office space, if the project is to outfit a new office, and we look at the square footage of the lease, and it's going to be, so many thousand square feet, and we can get numbers like what it costs per square foot to outfit an office space, we can probably come up with some pretty good estimate. And that's called a parametric estimate. We relating it to something else, lines of code. Coder can develop so many lines of code, usually in a day, and so we can use that as a rule of thumb to give us an estimate, which we call a parametric estimate. budgetary estimates, supplier quotes. We may have some specific units. We may know that our manufacturing facility, our factory, can develop so many units per hour as an estimate, and usually our cost per hour or such and such, except for material costs or finishing costs, inspection costs. And so we can get some form of budgetary estimate there. And then, of course, there's that definitive estimate that we're talking about, which is really built up based on a detailed statement of work, good, accurate data, and specifications, work breakdown structure, etc. All of those type of things. Whatever type of estimate that we're applying, we need to base them on the best we can as far as achieving these ideas, a solid understanding of the requirements and specifications. That becomes more firm and more solid as we get further into it and we have more time to actually work the estimate. On a couple of hours of time to do some type of high level a rough order of magnitude estimate, we're not going to have a solid understanding of the requirements and specifications. We'll have at best a cursory 10-minute, 5-minute discussion of what they may be, which really doesn't amount to very much. The estimate's got to be based on the current approved scope and exactly what is the project going to be. What is it now? What is the signed off documentation for the scope of the project? What are the limits of the project? We want to have a basis of estimate documentation. In other words, every estimate we put together, we want to have a basis for it. What did we reference it to? Did we do work like this last year, or is this similar to some other work we're doing? What is it? What is the detailed set of assumptions it's doing? We want to make sure it's based on attainable schedules, on realistic schedules, not schedules that are so optimistic that we have no chance to achieve it. And a reasonable cost for the work, what it should cost. Not a lot of reserve in there or fat or cushion or whatever, but a reasonable cost of what the work should be, including having identified the skill level, the quantity of people we need, what kind of resources we need, and then understanding how this work is going to be accomplished. A good, sound approach to managing the project. How are we going to work with the teams that are out of country, or teams that are in another part of the country, or even in another part of our company but in a different location. So we want to use the most accurate method that we can. We want to communicate the level of precision. We want to involve the team. I'd like to have the key subject matter experts involved in the planning, in the cost estimating. We want to consider how are we going to do this? Are we all going to be working in a big bullpen? Are we working in our offices? Are we going to be working at different locations? What's it going to be? And then we want to have estimates. It would be really good if we can base our estimates on some history or some previous experience our team, the people that are working on this, have had in the past. Because by having it related to previous work, we can have assessment of how good it's going to be. And we should never back into an estimate. We never want to hear what somebody thinks it should cost, and then we figure out how to make that estimate the estimate that comes true. And we don't want to pad the estimate. We want to have what I've referred to as a should cost. If someone feels that should cost is a little bit too optimistic, and they really would like to have a little more added to it, well, then I would say, why don't the way to do that is to provide the estimate and what it should be, and then add a risk item to it that there is some concern that this task will actually require this much extra funding or whatever based on whatever conditions it is, and put it as a risk element, and that keeps the estimate as a should cost and not having a certain amount of contingency built into it. Bottom bullet, collect any uncertainty separately as a risk consideration, which is what I just basically said. When we talk about the methods of estimating, there's really two major categories: qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative means that fundamentally it's not based on numbers, it's based on judgment, compared it to similar projects, and doing one of the high-level estimates, WAGs, that we were talking about previously. If we get into numerical estimating, numerical-based estimating. Then we're looking at maybe like vendor bids. We may use three-point assessments such as PERT, or we look at the my most favorite, which is we take the WBS and go all the way down, determining each task, and then we look and analyze each task for what it needs and subject matter experts, duration, facilities, deliverables, constraints, etc., etc. And we'll talk more about that. So as we look through some of these methods of estimating now, if we look at expert advice, maybe the inventor of a technology, a vendor selling a project, or some academic resource that maybe is skilled in the research of the technology or what we intend to use. Another method would be a Delphi technique, a group technique, which is where we have all members of the group that are not working with each other, but they're independently giving us an initial estimate. And then we usually do that like 3 passes of guesses and explanations, and then we use the average of the third pass to basically come up with what we consider to be the final group estimate. We can usually use historical data, all right, and historical data, we're relying on the project results from previous projects. We're using actual data that we have. We're looking at the risks that arose then, the problems that arose then, the skill sets that were used. We have a lot of really good hard data that we can reference this to and use to base our current estimate on. There may be project notebooks where other project teams have kept notebooks that have data in them that refers to or references or can give us insight into what our estimate should be. And then a lot of times companies keep histories of their project activity in databases, and we can look it up there and go from there. I mentioned earlier the 3-point technique, or PERT, and that's simply similar to what we do in PERT scheduling. And we make 3 estimates. One of them is pessimistic. What's a pessimistic? What do we think is the most likely, and what do we think is an optimistic estimate? And then we take these estimates, and we take the pessimistic, and then we take the most likely one, and we multiply that by 4, and then we take the optimistic, and then we divide it by 6. What we're really doing is doing a weighted average. What we're saying is we're going to average the pessimistic, the most likely, and the optimistic. However, we're going to take the most likely 4 times. In other words, we're going to give it 4 times the weight of the pessimistic and optimistic. And then we're going to divide that by 6 because we really have 6 numbers. We got the pessimistic, we're using the most likely 4 times, so that's 5, and we're using the optimistic, and that's 6, so we divide it by 6. So that's a simple averaging technique, but it's a weighted average because we used the most likely 4 times. And then there's a wideband Delphi technique, which is a combination of using the Delphi technique we talked about and the 3-point technique we did above. In other words, every member will actually, in each one of the estimates, give 3 points. They'll give a pessimistic, most likely, and optimistic, and then we'll go through some calculations, finding out on the slide. We'll do the averages and compute those, and we'll work it from that point of view, and that's considered to be a wideband Delphi technique. Also, quite often when I get into a situation where maybe I have another department that's doing an estimate for me or building an estimate, I'll go out and I'll also ask for a vendor bid. I'll ask for a third-party quote. And sometimes I use those as stalking horses. Sometimes I use them as a point of reference. Then there's parametric estimates, which we've talked about previously. Bottoms up, which we'll spend a lot of time on. That's going through it task by task. Allocation is from the top down. That's when somebody just in management says that here's what this should cost, here's how much money you have, and now what you got to do is allocate it. You got to flow it down through the project to the individual tasks so that you can fund each task. And budgeted, apportioned funding is much the same thing. And we'll talk a lot more about that later on as we get further down into this. Spending a minute on top-down estimating and bottoms-up estimating, just so that you have a perspective on these. Top-down estimating is when someone at the top or middle management for however they do it, they come up with a number, and then we have to allocate it, break it down. Bottoms up, again, is the one I have the most confidence in. It's the one I insist on when I'm doing any kind of planning or baselining, and that's when we get down to the level of work, each task, and we work and estimate each task and then build that cost up. If we're looking at the top-down strategy, these are usually given at the top, as I said, and then it just keeps working its way down to the lower levels. The bottoms-up strategy is usually the most accurate. It provides the best level of accuracy. Also, it gives you a good detailed description of the resources you need, the labor hours, the duration of tasks, what are the materials. You have the best estimate that you can get to take to management for approval, and it also provides you with all the information you need to be able to do the rest of the project planning and come up with a schedule, resource allocations, and things of that nature. Now, a lot of what's going to happen, what we're talking about, is based on our common methodology of really planning. And we start out with a project overview statement, which is maybe the project charter, maybe the initial one page that showed the problem or the opportunity we were trying to solve for the project, what the project goal is, what is it we're trying to achieve, any objectives that we need to achieve on the way to the goal, and then what are the success criteria is, and any major assumptions or risks or obstacles that come to mind as in that early stage. Once we have that approved, then we want to break it down to the work breakdown structure and break the work down structure all the way down until we've identified every task that has to be accomplished to achieve that project. In other words, the project overview, the goal might be put a man on the moon within 10 years and bring him back alive. And then from that, that's our project title. That's the top level WBS. And then we break that down to launch system, life support system, space vehicle, whatever, and then we keep breaking those down and breaking those down until we get to the tasks that we can clearly understand and we can clearly define exactly what it takes to do that. And how we do that is after we get the WBS, we create a basis of estimates sheet for each task. In other words, we need to describe each task, what is to be accomplished, what is to be delivered, how long it's going to take, what are the subject matter experts needed, what kind of labor do we need, what kind of deliverables do we need, what kind of constraints are there or dependencies on that. In other words, someone has got a design task, but they can't start the design until they have a specification or a requirements document or a system design or some data. As we go through it, we may identify some things that bother us, and so we want to list them as potential risks. Also, as a part of the task description and the basis of estimate sheet, we want to record on there, what is the basis for this estimate? Did we just do this from experience? Did we just do this based on a job we did, a task we did on a project last year, but we think this task is twice as hard or twice as easy or anything like that? We really want to have all that kind of information there. And then from having all those tasks, we want to develop the project network. In other words, in what order do these tasks have to be done, or what's the best order for the tasks to be done? Which tasks have to be done before another one can be started? Which ones can we start at the beginning of the project? Which ones are required to wait until other tasks are done? And then by knowing what that network is, and by understanding what our estimate of the duration time for each task is, we can determine what the duration of the project is, and we also can identify the critical path. Very significant elements. But when we have a network, it's not on a time basis. So on the network with the not on a time basis, that tells us the order of the work, but not when. We haven't figured it out from holidays or weekends or anything like that. So that network then we want to build as a Gantt chart, because in a Gantt chart we'll put all those tasks in there, but we do it on a time basis. So that way we know when the weekends are, when the holidays are, what tasks will be running in parallel, what tasks will be running consecutively, concurrently, however that's going to work. And we also can load all the resources into the task from our basis of estimate sheets. And with that in mind, doing that, Okay, then we have our resource loaded, and if we have any resource conflicts, like we need 10 of this or 5 of those kind of people, but we only got 3, and so we may have to move some tasks around so we don't use more than 3 at any one time. And so that may push the schedule out. Those are the kind of things that happen when we do resource leveling. And from that, we are at a position, we have all the information we need to build our estimate of the tasks. With that as established as a foundation for our thinking right now we can really get into the estimating approach, and we can realize that WBS provides us a huge benefit. What it does is it provides us the ability to make estimates at a very manageable level. We can we break it down till we understand what the tasks are very clearly, which increases our ability to provide accurate estimates and select accurate levels of skill levels, what kind of people we need on the tasks, what materials do we need, how long are they going to take. It will actually provide cost and schedule that will support a logical plan, and then actually our WBS will provide, its structure provides awesome tracking and traceability ability so that we can actually look down our WBS structure from the very top down to the tasks, and we can see the organization of it. And looking up from the tasks, we can actually collect our costs at the task level and roll those costs all the way up to the project level, and then we have the ability to see what our cost picture looks like all the way up to the top level at the project level. So the WBS provides us an excellent correlation for the cost, and also the WBS provides us with a structure that if there are any changes or any additional work or work that has to be done differently, if we have to make a change to that work, the WBS can be modified without changing the existing WBS. In other words, most changes add to it. And without changing the existing WBS, we do not lose the traceability or the integrity of our project planning to date. And that is incredibly important for any project that's going to last over a couple of hours. Here's a picture of a WBS for an aircraft system, and the white boxes are actually would be the tasks the way this WBS is broken down. But however, if we just look down that center one, the air vehicle, and we look at the task, airframe, engine, communications, navigation, fire control, each one of those is going to be a number of projects itself. But this gives you an idea. You break it down as far as you need to have the detail that you need to be able to completely define the task, estimate it, and to get all the parameters you need and all the information you need in order that that task can be competently and proficiently performed. So when we do our cost estimating, we really do it by task. We want to look at the direct labor resources, the number of hours, rate, skill types. Is there any overtime required? Are there direct materials required for the task? What are they? What do they cost? Okay. And a point to make is material that is not consumed or delivered as a part of the project is overhead. It is not a direct cost. For instance, if we have a project schedule or a project report or project meeting minutes, and we want to make copies of it. We go over to the copier and we make 20 copies, and we use 50 sheets of paper or a quarter of a ream or something like that. That paper is overhead. It is not a direct cost to the project. However, if we were to make a report, say or a user's manual, we had to deliver 25 copies of a user's manual to the customer. The paper, even if it was the same paper as that in the copy machine, even if it was the same type, the paper used in those 25 copies of the user's manual would be a direct cost and would be considered direct materials to the project. I hope you can see the difference in what we're talking about. This is an example of a basis of estimates form. This basis of estimates form provides the task description. I can put sub-tasks in there. I can break the schedule in. I can show the schedule for the duration, skill set, what kind of people we need, how many full-time equivalents, what the distribution is it level, is it sloping, I can put down what the risks are, is there any capital equipment required to perform this task, do we need a shade table, do we need a heat chamber, do we need special copying machines, what do we need, are there any dependencies for this task? Like I said, do we need a specification before it can be started? When is it needed? Where does it come from? Who's the supplier? What's the deliverables out of this task? How do we know when we're done? What are the deliverables that have to be? When are they due? And who gets them? Who will receive them? And then we talk about the basis for the estimate, and we can cite any previous jobs or records or rationale, how we came up with this estimate. And if all it is based on our experience or it's an estimated guess, we put that down. We put down the truth. And then there's places for sign-offs, approvals, WBS numbers, labels, etc., so that we can keep and organize this basis of estimate form. And we need one of these for every task. It doesn't have to be on a piece of paper or a form. It can be electronic. It can be data. It can be organized in any way, shape, or form. What I'm speaking about, though, it needs to contain the type and the information that is shown here on this type of form. And then our success factors by building an adequate WBS statement of work and work package, making sure we have good granularity. In other words, make sure we can really understand those tasks, understand the definition, make sure we understand who's going to do it, suppliers, whatever. And then making sure that the quality of the estimates, what are we basing them on, and it really, and the confidence levels we have in it, and any risk or opportunities. By having those provided, we will really add very solid credibility and support. Remember that slide that I showed you in the very beginning of this presentation? We will have very good credibility and support for the estimate. Okay? And we always got to remember that the estimating is subjective. Even if we're basing it quantitatively, there are subjective elements in our decisions, in our evaluations. What we want to do is, for the resources, try to use full-time equivalents as much as possible. When you're using less than a full-time equivalent, sometimes there becomes practical issues like, when do I get somebody? I'm supposed to have somebody for 2 hours from 4 to 6. The other project, they don't get done their work at 4 o'clock. They don't get here till 5. And we only get an hour of them. There are big issues when you're sharing individuals. So I really like to get as much full-time equivalents or people totally committed to the project as we can. And yes, estimates become better as you know more. Just think about it. If you had 15 minutes for an estimate, how good would it be compared to if you had 3 weeks for an estimate? And then risks and contingency are major players. You want to keep those separate so that you can evaluate them as a part of your risk evaluation, your risk analysis, and in the construction of your risk management plan that comes later. And then the overhead tasks need to be included too. If you have any reviews or anything like that that are going to be done and have to include people that are not directly on the project. The kind of things that can lead to poor estimates, emissions, poor defined, when you don't do things well, all of these things are basically counter or the opposite side of the things that I have been talking about. No risk or opportunity processes, you're not applying the right skill levels. You need a senior engineer and you want to use a junior technician. There's nothing wrong with either one of those individuals. The thing is, their level of capability and knowledge and understanding is different, and that's what makes it different on a task. What about coordination, availability of customers? What about the fact that if you have to provide reports to your customer and they got to approve it, and so you need to compute in there that what's the turnaround time that the customer has to send back either a report with comments or a signed report. So it's those kind of things. Failure to understand indirect costs or overhead. In other words, if you don't really understand your cost picture, understand the company's accounting system, you are going to get into a lot of trouble because your costs are not going to reflect what your budget said. So this is a good checklist when you get done with your cost estimate. Going down these elements gives you a pretty good sense of the major elements you want to look for to make sure that you got a good cost estimate. There's a description of the scope, reference WBS, documentation on your BOEs, indication of range if you got uncertainty about any part of the estimates. Your assumptions are documented. You got a risk assessment. All of these kind of things. Okay, and if you've got a review of the good costs, go through it and take a good review of the project costs and see if they make sense and see if they indeed agree with what your concepts, what you thought you would as you got smarter working through the total estimate with your team. Okay, and a couple of things to think about and realize is that your estimate is not a performance budget baseline. In other words, what I'm saying is your estimate, your cost estimate, is really a cost estimate. After it gets approved, it becomes a performance budget baseline. If it gets approved, it is the budget baseline that you're going to be working to. But you got to go through that review and approval cycle or acceptance by a customer. Okay? And we're talking about, the estimates. There is a lot of credibility to the estimates. They have to be well thought out, and you're basing them on a lot of good information and good consideration by knowledgeable and experienced people. There are a lot of different ways that you can reference your estimates. Sometimes repetitive task estimating manuals, and you can be looking at previous estimates. And then you got to look at the type of estimate. Is this a grassroots, from the ground up with a good WBS, consistent WBS? And when you have got the cost of the project, realize that you have not priced it. Pricing is something management does. Costing is something the project team does. And that the primary tools you used for the estimate is your statement of work, is the WBS, the basis of estimate, and the schedule that goes with it. I want to thank you for your time today. This is our pricing and estimating for the first week. Next week we'll take it from here and we'll go into the first of 2 weeks presentation on cost control and earned value management. This is the foundation that gets us into that conversation and that material. And I wish you a good week. I'm really looking forward to seeing your discussions and working with you and commenting back and forth. Have a great week and have a good day.